Well, hello YouTube. I just got a call from my boss and it looks like my vacation is over. I'll be driving back to Utah tomorrow. I'm still in Estes Park, Colorado. And while I've been out doing the national park thing, I thought I would make a video about some of my thoughts on the national park system and government ownership of land. Um, because it's one of those things I think very few people really seriously question the government, especially the federal government, owning land and managing it. Um, there's a couple things. First of all, there's a belief that if the government didn't own the land, then it would just be squandered somehow or another. This is something that I think you can't look at except on a case-by-case basis on what exactly what happened to land that the government owns. Um, Much land, even very scenic land, is essentially very marginal. I've been up in these mountains, and they're really spectacular to look at, but actually, if you wanted to live there, it would suck. They don't have a lot of water. They have extremely harsh weather conditions, and they have extremely limited access. Um, People will allege, oh, rich people will just go and they'll build houses everywhere, and it's true. Like if you look at the town here, Estes Park, or the other town on the other side, I believe it's called Granby or Granby Lake. They are basically playgrounds for rich people. There's nice houses bordering on mansions all over the place, the majority of which are vacant much of the year. And if you go to the businesses and stuff in here, I've been really surprised. Practically everybody who works, say at the gas stations or the fast food restaurants or even the nicer restaurants, um, the drugstores, whatever, are foreigners. They're not the kids of the people who live here because, quite frankly, not very many people actually live here. The people who own the businesses, they live here. They do have families. There is a school, but there's way more houses than there are people, and that's because rich people come out here. And people think, oh, if the government didn't cordon off that nice land, the rich people would just go and take over the whole thing. In some instances, this is probably correct, but actually not that much of the time. If you look, uh, there's actually a town in the Rocky Mountain National Park at the turn of the century. It was a mining town. They mined silver. It at one time had almost 5,000 people in it, but it became abandoned. And it wasn't abandoned because the government rode in and said, hey, you're making this beautiful land look ugly with your silver mine. It was that it was just not profitable, and the reason it wasn't profitable is because back then it wasn't subsidized by the government, and it cost too much money to basically bring supplies in and ship supplies out. Now that all changed when the government decided to build roads all over the place. See, right now, if you want to have a house here, all you got to do is buy the land and build a house. If we had a free market, you would also have to build and maintain the road. But right now, the government's going to tax urbanites in Denver and in New York and whatever to build roads, and then so the rich don't even have to pay anything to have the roads plowed. And I can imagine that very few people would be willing to go to the incredible expense to maintain and to build the infrastructure necessary to maintain the lifestyle that they currently have. So that's one part. The other part is, like I said, how marginal the land is. But the other part is there's no objective way to say that the scenic lands have to be kept scenic or their only use is to look. Now, I'm an outdoorsy kind of guy. I like looking at mountains. I like hiking in wilderness. I like seeing animals. But there is no way that my preference is normative or that anyone else's preference is normative. If those silver miners could provide people something that they want, then there's no reason to say, oh, a mining town is evil and wrong, and what should be there is nothing so people can watch bighorn sheep with binoculars. There's no ethical way to say that one use is better than the other, except to the extent that the use that's currently is not based on any kind of voluntary interaction. The government has specifically seized this land with eminent domain, and it uses it for its purposes. And that's the other thing. I actually was thinking about this before I did this. I was reading Butler Schaefer's book on property, and he made the point. He used the national parks as an example. He said, uh, if you ask, if you call the National Park Services and you say who owns the park, they'll say the American people. And of course, they have signs everywhere saying it's your park, take care, blah blah blah. But it's clearly not your park. You can't go and say, okay, I'd like to have my slice of it, or I'd like to do this. They control it. They tell you what you can and can't do. Imagine if I were to say, you can own your house, but I can tell you when you can come in your house. I can tell you where you can go in your house. I can tell you what you can do in their house. I can charge you for your house. I can bar you from coming in. You can't do anything without my permission, but it's your house. No, then it's my house if that's the case. And that's the way the national parks and government property in general is operated. The government decides, and their claim that you own it is I mean, ownership is a tricky concept. I mean, very few almost every definition I've heard, you know, relies on use of a synonym. So it's very hard to really explain it, and I'm not satisfied that it can be done very well. However, I will say that one thing it's not, if someone has no tangible control whatsoever on a material thing, whether it be land or any other object, then I don't see what basis you could possibly have to say that they own it. So there's that. And the government, I mean, it just takes these beautiful landmarks, it just says that they own them, and then they act like it's their gift to us, like they're being really nice and giving them to us and allowing us to look at them when they basically just stole it. I mean, just man, if I had that kind of power, I would just pick the nicest beaches in the country and say, I own these beaches, and then I'd say, you can come on them if you pay me $20 entry fee and only do what I say, and then act like I'm the nicest, most philanthropic guy in the world because I permit you to enjoy our beaches. It's ridiculous. And the other thing that really bugged me is I saw a sign about, well, leaving aside the legitimacy of the ownership, the parks are mismanaged to one degree or another. It's not that it's fairly well known that the anti-fire policy that, as epitomized by Smokey the Bear, has more or less been extremely wrong-headed and in some cases disastrous. In fact, I remember reading an article that said even Stone Age Indians realized that you had to have periodic burnings or else the ecosystem would be basically completely disrupted. But for like 80 years or 100 years, the national parks were dead set against it, and you know, they had the whole Smokey the Bear campaign. So I saw a sign in the park. It said, was Smokey the Bear wrong? And I thought this was hilarious. Here the government it's acknowledging that the policy of not allowing any fires is not good. But rather than say, oh, we had a bad policy, we mismanaged something, they blame it on the anthropogenic cartoon Ursine that they themselves created. So it's Smokey the Bear's fault that there's not, that the national parks have been mismanaged. When, I mean, Smokey the Bear is nothing but a front, a happy, cuddly front for the government running the show. All right, so it's an amazing example of them refusing to even entertain the possibility that maybe they made a mistake, which they did, and they continue to do in different ways. So, I mean, it's not like the park rangers are evil or anything, but they exercise more control over, I mean, all over their signs saying you can't go here, you can't go here. I thought that they belonged to the American people, right? If I want to climb that ridge to look at that waterfall, who is this guy in a green costume? I mean, is it his land? I would understand if someone homesteaded land and they had private property and they said, get off. I don't want you feeding my sheep or eroding my subalpine forest. I would understand that, and I would totally appreciate that. But if someone just said, you know what, I own everything here, just because and I'm going to tax you to maintain it. And by the way, you can only do what I say. That's just ridiculous. So um, this is another issue, not just the national parks. It's not something that people seem to typically care about, but I think it's actually one of the biggest issues in the country is how much land is run by the federal government. And it's interesting because if you look, there's a map online someplace that shows all the states and what percentage of them is owned by the federal government. And it's fascinating because when the federal government was smaller and less powerful, the states that were in the union at that point, a far smaller proportion of them are owned by the federal government. So you can actually chart the growth of federal power based on when states were admitted into the union and how much land the federal government owns in those states. So if you go some of the New England states, like, well, Delaware is not New England, but they have less than 5%, some of them, and a lot of them have less than 10. Most of the states east of the Mississippi have 20 or less, and most of them have like 10 or less. If you go west of the Mississippi, with the exception of Texas, you're looking at 50% plus, and like the western states, you're looking at 75% plus. And I think the state with the most is Nevada, and it's like 85 or 86% is owned by the federal government. And they don't just preserve these lands; they use them in whatever way they think is most beneficial to them. So if there's land that they think the most that they can get out of it is by leasing the rights to oil companies, that's what they'll do. If they think they can get the most of it by pretending they're being environmentalists, then that's what they'll do. If they can get the most out of it by selling mining rights, that's what they'll do. Whatever they think, or put a military base, is what they do on a lot of them. It's to their advantage. They don't sit and go, what would be the best use of this land for the people? I mean, anyone who believes that the federal government, or any government agency for that matter, has brainstorming sessions like that is a fucking moron. They never ever do that. And even if they did, even if some conscientious congressman or whatever got together and said, what would be best for the American people? When they're outside the market and they're based on taxes, they have no way to even know that. They're just guessing. All right? It's just playing at market, as Rothbard would say. And if it's not criminally mismanaged, it's still a horrible misuse of resources. And we would all be much wealthier if this land was not held by a monopoly that has no idea how to put it to good use.